Yo, what's up? What's up? Once again, here we are, Neil and Desmond Show at Our Voice Podcast. I am Desmond Meade, Executive Director of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, and to my right is
Neil Volz. I'm the Deputy Director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. What's up, y'all? We are excited for another fantastic conversation with an amazing guest. How you feeling, Des?
Hey, it's going to be fire.
It's going to be fire. It is going to be fire.
Listen, y'all, like we always say, Our Voice Podcast is our attempt to elevate the voices of people directly impacted by the criminal justice system, understanding that even though that there are so many folks out there with all kinds of degrees in criminology and sociology and law and all that kind of stuff, right? There's some degrees that they can't get, right? And that's that degree of personal experience. And we are what we call subject matter experts. And this podcast is one of many ways that we elevate the voices of people who are subject matter experts, making sure that our voices are heard throughout the country. And so here we are, right? You know, we're ready to do, man.
Oh, man, I'm excited, Des. And you're right. I mean, this is a place where we can have real conversations, get past the headlines, get past just kind of the surfacey stuff, and really dig into, you know, how the system really works and how it impacts people's lives.
Well, let me tell you, when you talk about people that impact systems, man.
Oh, you starting the hype already, aren't you?
That's we talking about the kind of guests we have, right? I mean, I keep telling Brandon and Xavier that, man, every time I think that they reach the pinnacle of getting us exciting guests, they just outdo themselves again. And
we put the call out. We were like, man, we need GOATs on this show. We need the Tom Brady's on this show, and we need Tom
like
Brady
impactors, right? And that actually can relate to, you know, the meat of discussions or issues that we deal with on a daily basis. And let me tell you, you know, you talking about we can do whatever we want on this show. You know, I'm going to be on my best behavior, man, because, you know, I got the top cop around, you know, right now. So
that's right.
I'm not even trying to be bad, and we're going to do this thing by the book, right? And so, but Neil, why don't you tell us about our guest, man?
All right. Well, let me hype her up a little bit before we do the official,
you know, read
invite.
That, please.
I mean,
don't get
look
nothing
at this
wrong
list.
with this,
man.
Right.
I don't
read
want.
that.
I mean, there's a whole list. It starts with our guest received her JD from the University of Florida in 1999.
She's a gator.
A gator. That's right.
I don't understand a gator wearing dolphin colors, though. You know, I'm trying to figure that out.
It's possible they're not dolphin colors, but you know, you know, some people, you know, she can speak for herself.
All right, well, we're gonna overlook that right there. That first one.
She began her career as a public defender in Orange County, Florida, before transitioning to the private practice. I'm already like, it's got State Attorney Worrell, so I'm already
don't even say
that
name.
out. She's previously been a clinical professor at the University of Florida School of Law.
Another reference to the University of Florida, right?
Amen.
All right, we got to get some kind of reference to like the FAMU or FIU up in here, some kind of way. But
I was trying to sneak in an Ohio State reference, but I hear what you're saying.
Not Ohio State, bro.
As an advocate for keeping youth out of the criminal legal system, she developed and implemented the Your Future, Your Choice program to teach youth their rights and responsibilities as citizens. Definitely something that we want to dig into. Upon leaving the University of Florida, she became a founding director of the Conviction Integrity Unit as the State Attorney's Office in Orange County. Another cool thing that we really want to dig into, understanding that kind of integrity in the process. And this is a process where she investigated cases of wrongful conviction. Before being elected as state attorney, she served as the chief legal officer of the Reform Alliance.
You talking about our partners, the Reform Alliance?
Yeah.
The one that's ran by Robert Rooks?
That's exactly, the one we worked with on some probation reforms during this session. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
So, you know, let me just give it out there and just say, welcome to the show, State Attorney Monique Worrell. Welcome to Our Voice Podcast. We're so fired up you're here.
Welcome. What's up? How do you like our theme song, first of all?
Thank you so much. I love the theme song.
Yes.
It was bumping. I appreciate that. It was really good.
Yes. That's what we always, you know, one of the things that we try to do, even with this podcast, is how do we show the public a different side of people who have been convicted of crimes before, you know, because so many times people think, you know, they put that label on you felon, and they just think everything negative, right? And so we like to create a little swag. We're an organization that got a little swag. We got our gear, we got our tennis shoes, FRRC, Air Force Ones.
I was about to say, I know you guys got some shoes too.
Yep. And we try to just show that, we're not our worst mistake on our worst day, right? That we're more than that. We're someone's son, daughter, father, mother, brother, sister, and we are people who are capable of being an asset to our communities, right? And so, we always try to promote that, But welcome on the show. I'm ready to dig in. Let me tell you, I got to say this. Every week we do the show. Our production team of Brandon and Xavier, they go through a whole pre-production checklist, and they give us this thing here, right? It's a sheet
these.
And you know what? We never, ever follow that. We frustrate the heck out of them, right? Because we don't ever follow this thing, right? And once again, I was looking through it. There's some great stuff on here. We might get to it, but I don't think we're going to follow this script, right? The first and foremost is that I think that, one of the things that I learned when I went through my bachelor's in public safety, public safety management with a concentration in criminal justice, one of the things I discovered is that I think it's so important that people get to know the person behind the badge first, right? And don't let the badge be the judge of them. And I think that, with coming on this show, first of all, thank you for doing that. But this is an opportunity for people to know who is State Attorney Monique Worrell, right? And I think that you have a very unique, I won't say unique, it's a common background because, United States infatuation with mass incarceration has managed to touch like the lives of every other family member, right? And people tend to ignore it. They only think it's a small group of people.
But I think it's unique in that most of the people who end up in this position are not those people.
Yeah.
So I think that's what makes me unique to this position is that I can perceive the system in a way that most people who came before me cannot.
Okay, so tell us why.
So as I talked about a lot when I was running for state attorney, I always knew that I was going to impact the criminal legal system in a major way. And I was kind of born to do it. I was born into a family where my oldest brother served in the United States Air Force and ended up being diagnosed with bipolar disorder, as many people who suffer from PTSD are. And in that, he began to self-medicate with illicit substances, and he became addicted to narcotics and spent most of my life in and out of the criminal legal system. And I knew as a little girl, my brother's 15 years older than I am, I knew as a little girl watching his struggle that was wrong. We should not have a criminal legal system that incarcerates individuals who struggle with substance abuse and mental illness. And I knew that my destiny, my calling was to impact the system in a major way. So my entire educational trajectory went towards becoming a defense attorney because I believed that was the way for me to impact the system.
So here you are, you're young, right? So what you're saying is like 9 years old, you have a calling on your life and you were like, I know this is the pathway that I'm supposed to walk, right? Can you tell us a little bit about like go deeper if you could, you're
Would you
young.
want to go back to when she was born? I mean,
I'm intrigued. I mean, you're
how far you want to go back?
I think you're right. You had said that a lot of other people end up in your shoes actually didn't walk that walk, right? So what you're saying is it started early.
Right. So I believe what it did is it gave me a divine empathy for individuals in this situation that you would have had to either been impacted by the system personally or, like me, be a family member of someone who was personally impacted by the system. So that's why I love about your opening when you said we have something that is a very unique degree, and that is personal impact, personal experience with the system. And although I was not personally in the system as a family member, we are also impacted in a way that most people are not.
That's why they're people who have loved ones that's been impacted are also members of our organization. You know, we have 20 chapters throughout the state of Florida, over 24,000 members. And those are people who have either been directly impacted or people who have loved ones that's been caught up in the system. So technically, you know, you qualify to be a member of Florida Rights Restoration Coalition. And dues are payable once a month. You know, I'm just saying, you know. But there's a couple of things I do want to touch on, though, because I think it's so important about the public defender. So, you know, I know when I was in law school, right, and there were folks that were like, yeah, you know, I'm for social justice and I want to reform the criminal justice system. The first thing everybody think about is that, well, yeah, I want to be a public defender, right? And I remember one of my professors in probably my second year was like, you know, yeah, that's fine and all, but you could also change the system by being a prosecutor, right? Could you speak on that?
I'll happily speak on it, but I'll tell you that in my capacity as a law professor, I encouraged my students to be defense attorneys because I believed that impacting the system by saving one person at a time was a worthy cause. And in my capacity as a law professor, I taught my students who would become defense attorneys and prosecutors how to view the system through a different lens. So in my capacity as a defense attorney, I thought, okay, well, I'm helping you stay out of jail today. I'm helping you get your life back on track. And I felt that those were worthy causes to help those individuals. But what you're speaking to is something greater, right? Because as a prosecutor, even if not the elected prosecutor, just a prosecutor holding a docket of, 30, 40, 50 people, you have the ability to impact all of those cases, all of those individuals. So the ability to impact the system on a larger scale is present on the side of the prosecution, and that's what ultimately had me run for state attorney.
I mean, because you all are the ones that actually decide whether or not to charge somebody, right?
Absolutely.
Public defender can't do that.
Right.
And then the other thing with that is that it seems as if in most cases, the state attorney's office are a little bit better funded than the public defender's office, right? And so it might not be as even keel as we would want it to be, right? Access to investigators and things of that nature. Is that always true, or is it sometimes true?
I think it's sometimes true. So when there is legislation regarding the funding of state attorneys and public defenders' offices, for instance, I was in Tallahassee this legislative session, basically lobbying for increases in salaries, and the increases went to both public defenders and state attorneys. So it wasn't something that was just for one side or another. There is a common school of thought that when you have a public defender, you have something that's less than a lawyer. That's not true. That's not true.
I was going to get into that. I don't know why. Listen, you got to let me ask a question.
All right.
I need to set that up.
Okay.
Let me set that up real quick, because one of the things, matter of fact, even when I was incarcerated, people would refer to public defenders as public pretenders, right?
Yeah. I heard it all.
And I did a lot of post-conviction work while I was in prison. And let me tell you something I found out, right? I understood about how public defenders were. I mean, you walk into the office, man, they got stacks and stacks of files that they have to actually deal with, right? But the thing that really stuck out to me was that one of the most popular motions that is done for post-conviction relief is Rule 3850, right? Ineffective assistance of counsel, right? And I'm going to tell you that the overwhelming majority of attorneys in which the court found that provided ineffective assistance of counsel was not public defenders.
Absolutely.
There were private attorneys that took people money and didn't really give them the type of defense that correlated with the money that they was charging them, right? And I looked at some of the greatest attorneys even coming out of Florida with public defenders, right? Like Roy Black,
Monique
Right.
Worrell. So,
Well, can I ask you a question then? So what it looks like is that some people think that public defenders are less than attorneys.
Oh, absolutely.
Could you tell us why that's not true?
So what you'll hear is, I want a real lawyer, right? I don't want a public pretender. I don't want a public defender. I want a real lawyer. So there's misconceptions that go along with that. One of them is that public defenders are not real lawyers. And I will tell you that public defenders are barred licensed attorneys, just like any private lawyer. But what happens is public defenders are comprised of many different types of individuals, just like the private bar is.
That's right.
You have good lawyers and you have bad lawyers. And that's true for public defenders. That's also true for private practice. People
Very
tend
true.
to feel that if they're paying money for something, then they're getting something more than that they would get if they paid their $50 fee for the public defender. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes it's not. And it's not contingent upon whether or not that person's a public defender. It's contingent upon whether or not that person is passionate about the work that they're doing. I'll tell you that some of my best work was done as a public defender. I'll tell you that when I went into private practice, I was limited on the things that I could do because I didn't have the access to investigators that I had when I was a public defender. I didn't have the access to some of the resources that I had when I was a public defender. And as a private practitioner who went out and hung their own shingle, my ability to practice was much more limited than it was when I was a public defender. But I was someone who knew that this is what I wanted to do all my life. So I was very passionate about the work. I was very passionate about the defense, and I wanted to ensure that my clients received justice. Some public defenders believe in that wholeheartedly. Some ended up being public defenders because there wasn't any place else for them to work.
So when I hear you say that, I'm thinking about people who are listening, right? I'm thinking about loved ones, family members in a tough time, trying to figure out, how am I going to walk forward through this process? I'm in the system now. What I'm hearing you say is that it's a more complicated conversation and decision to make than simply be like, oh, it's a public defender, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it really matters about the person.
Absolutely. I had a case the other day because as state attorney, I've been taking cases to court, and I had a case where someone wants to fire their public defender because they didn't like the plea offer that they received. And they were of the impression that if they fired the public defender and hired a private attorney, that they would somehow get a better deal. And I wanted to make it very clear, and I did this on the record, the offer is not going to change. It doesn't matter who you hire. This is what it is, and it's not going to change just because you have private counsel as opposed to a public defender. And a lot of times people end up spending money to get the same result that they would have gotten with a public defender.
And then they lose that money.
And then they lose that money in the process.
So my whole intention was to ask that question in a much broader question about perceptions, right? And so, I'm hearing you talk and it's bringing back memories. Even about, there are so many perceptions about the legal system when people go through it, right? Public pretender, that the state attorney runs the courtroom, the state attorney is going after folks and stacking charges and I could see that person wanting to get a private attorney and get the right private attorney who knows the state attorney or who knows the judge that can talk through. These are things that we just kind of like believe, right? And we see things happen in court that makes us believe that that's reality. The broader question is, what are some other misperceptions even about, the state attorney and the state attorney's office?
Well, I want to respond to that by saying, first of all, there's validity to some of those perceptions. Because if you get the wrong situation, you get the public defender who's not passionate about the work and isn't going to do the diligence that's necessary to properly investigate the case and ensure that the client gets the most fair defense possible, then that's a valid perception. And there are prosecutors who do stack charges and do go after people. So there's validity in that perception. So my response to that would be, every situation is different. And it's important for you to fully investigate the situation that you're in.
How can we do that when we're I mean, come on, we're like we can't afford bail, right? We're trapped in this dingy, dirty environment, of jail. I mean, all we want to do is go home. I know with me, I wanted to get out and get high, and so I wasn't trying to investigate all that. I was just trying to find the path of least resistance to get out of jail.
I understand that, but I guess my answer to that is if you don't, then you have no way of knowing if you're going to be the person who ends up spending $10,000 on a private lawyer to end up with the same result that you could have gotten with your public defender.
Oh, no, I'm going with the public defender because if I had $10,000 back in those days, shoot, I ain't trying to spend it on no lawyer. I'm trying to spend it on other things. But, how this, I remember just waking up maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, eating breakfast, getting on this cold bus because they turn up the AC like crazy. We standing like crazy. And then this was in Miami-Dade, and then getting sent to a holding cell where you basically have to stand up for another couple hours because the floor is even too dirty for you to even sit on, right? Then you get to move across the bridge to another holding cell where somebody already threw up and used the bathroom, and then after standing there for a few hours, a guard would come to the cage and say, "Oh, you've been reset," right? And you got to go back. You don't even get to see the inside of a courtroom. Right, and you have to go through that over again to where it breaks you down. It wears you down mentally. And
that's the coerciveness of the criminal legal system that is unspoken. And I think that someone has to make that known because that's not about who your legal counsel is. Yeah. That's about you making decisions to plea to something that you may not even be guilty of because you want out of that hell that is incarceration.
Well, guess what then? Let me tell you what happened then, right? So I do that for a minute, but then I remember appearing in front of this judge, Manny Crespo, and I'll never forget him. Man, he gave this beautiful speech about justice, right, and the legal system and the Constitution. And he was like, as a citizen of this country or whatever, and if you appear in this court, that you have the right to a trial. If you're being accused of something, you have a right to have your day in court, right? And I was like, you know what? You darn right, man. I want to go to trial because I'm not guilty of this, right? And I went to trial, and it was a man, possession of firearm by convicted felon. Stayed off for 3. I'm like, why should I take? And that's what the judge said. He basically said, don't take a plea if you're not guilty. And I said, no, I'm not going to just take 3 years, right, just because of convenience. That's it. I'm tired of that. I did it so many other times. That's why I have the pre-existing charge, a qualifying charge for what I'm facing now. And I took it to trial, and I lost. And when I lost, what the state asked for was the maximum sentence. And the very next day, after I was sentenced, the state attorney said to folks in the box, right, the defendants, don't be like Desmond. You better take this plea. I feel like that's another form of coercion.
It absolutely is.
Yeah, the trial penalty is what you
I'm penalized for exercising my constitutional right to a fair trial. I get penalized for that. And it's that threat of, man, either I take these couple of years or whatever years that they're asking, or I can get 10, 20. And I end up getting sentenced to 15 years. 15 years for something that I didn't do. I appreciate the process now because I know all of the stuff that I went through prepared me to be who I am today, right? And I only end up doing 3 of those years because I worked on my case. But to think that I would have had to have served about 12, 13 years in prison, and when I could have only just done 3, but I'm doing those 12 because I listened to this judge and it sounded so good.
And that's why I call it the criminal legal system.
Okay. I noticed that.
So you don't use the phrase criminal justice system, you use the phrase criminal legal system.
Because justice is what we are trying to attain. But by calling it the criminal justice system, that presumes that we have justice in our system. And that is just an example of the injustice that exists within the system. So I'll tell you, when I became state attorney, that trial penalty is one of the things that was on my list of things that we were going to stop doing. And what I have explained to my attorneys is, you make a plea offer that's based on what the case is worth. When you investigate your case and you go through all of the things of, how culpable the individual is, what their record is, all of those things, and you make a plea offer based on the worth of the case, and the fact that that person exercised their constitutional right to a trial should not change the value of the case. Yeah. But we have a system that has been formed on that trial penalty.
Without a doubt. It's the coercion that you're talking about.
It is the coercion.
And
it's
people need to understand
coercion.
that better when people are walking through, because, if you're not experienced in the system, and it's like, like Des said, right? You got a judge waving the flag and talking about, all these things. And suddenly it's like, okay, I am going to exercise my constitutional rights, when really there's a penalty for doing that. A harsh penalty.
A very harsh penalty.
Listen, I was a disciple, but Monique, you said something. This is the second time you used that word justice, and the first time you said it, what the thought that ran through my head was, I think that a lot of people think that justice is only for a person that is, say, the victim, right? And the question that I was like formulating in my mind is that who is justice for, right? Can justice also be for the accused, right? And I think you answered that question, but I'm gonna let you say it in your own words. So I don't want to put words in your mouth, but something tells me that a person who may have done something that was worthy of 30 days in jail, if even that much, right, getting sentenced to 10 years, that is not justice, and no one benefits from that.
So as a law professor, I used to start every single one of my classes by asking, what is justice? Right? Because that is a variable, and justice means many different things to many different people. And I would receive a wide gambit of responses from my students on what they believed justice is. But what I teach in my office is that we represent the community, and the community includes victims. It includes the accused. It includes the family of either of those individuals. It includes the public. And when we craft decisions on how cases should be resolved, all of those individuals have to be kept in mind. So justice is not just for victims. It's not just for the accused. It's for everyone. And a just result can never be that your case was worth 3 years before you went to trial and 15 after. In very limited cases where we have sexual assault, sexual battery, where we have forced a victim or a child victim to come in and face their accuser and go through the horror when all of the evidence proves that this individual is guilty. That's a different story.
I understand.
Right?
That. Yeah.
But in a case where there is no victim, like possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, where there is a 3-year statutory minimum mandatory, how can justice be the equivalent of 15 years because you exercised your constitutional right by going to trial?
The irony of that is that my release date was the same year that I received my Juris Doctorate degree. And if I didn't work on my case, I would have been getting out of prison in 2014 rather than getting a Juris Doctorate degree, right? And I think that we so unnecessarily and punish folks and sometimes over-punish them, right, for the sake of being tough on crime, right, and seeking justice, but no one gets justice from that. No one benefits. No one.
And I think it's important, you said something about 10 days in jail, if that much. One of the things that's really important to me is for us to begin to educate the public on the conditions of incarceration. As a professor, I made all my students visit the county jail as well as the state penitentiary. Because as a prosecutor who is from a suburban neighborhood, a middle class family, and has never seen what poor conditions look like, it's very easy to sit behind your desk and say 30 days in jail.
Yep.
60 days in jail.
Yep.
Right?
I think public defenders should actually be made to visit these jails and prisons because it's so easy to try to cop a plea or try to create a plea for various reasons, right? And so going back to they're good and bad public defenders, but when you look at the caseload, right, the caseload trying to push people towards a plea deal. We know that plea bargaining is the one thing that keeps this system afloat, right? But I think that, when you're asking somebody to roll the dice or,
you should know what it is that you're sending them to go and do.
Right. It's not paperwork you're filling out.
Exactly.
It's an experience somebody's going through.
They should have to understand. And again, as a professor, I would ask my students to close their eyes and envision themselves in a place that they could not leave when they wanted to.
So let me ask you a question. You have mentioned being a professor a couple of times, right? So you ask your students, what is justice, right? You talk to your students about going to visit the jail and the prison. What lessons did the students teach you that you bring with you, or what stories that you bring with you into the work that you're doing now? Because it sounds like being a professor was very, passionate. It was something you're passionate about, but also it sounds like it also helped, bring you to where you are today.
It did. I did it for 16 years, so it was a great part of my career. What I learned was how much the young people that we're sending into these professions do not know, right? So when I would take them through the exercise of what it feels like to be incarcerated, just the simple feeling of being able to get up right now and walk out that door is something that we all take for granted. You're in a room, and if I want to leave this space, I just get up and walk out the door.
That's right.
Yeah, wow.
But that is something that we take for granted because incarcerated people cannot do that. If I want to eat, I go to my kitchen and I make myself a sandwich.
Well, I hit up Uber Eats, I hit up Uber Eats real quick.
Those of us who live better can hit up Uber Eats, right? But these are just the pleasures of life that we take for granted, and we do not understand that the incarcerated population do not have access to decent meals. What's it like to share a bathroom where everyone's watching you use it?
And when you see that, when you feel that,
shower.
then the idea of being able to say, just 30 days, 60 days,
right?
It becomes a different
Because
process.
as a defense attorney, I would negotiate with prosecutors, and I remember one specific instance that infuriated me, that I was negotiating with the prosecutor and the offer was 30 days. And then I was giving my mitigation as to why this person shouldn't go to jail, and the prosecutor said 60 days. And he said, because you're still standing here.
Fighting for your client.
That when we started and we talked about your personal experience with your brother, I think that is so invaluable. It makes you even more valuable as a prosecutor because you bring the human element to it, right? I think that because I remember I was in on some kind of panel, and somebody was asking me about, well, Desmond, how would you change the policies for juvenile justice reform, right? And I'm like, listen, I'm not the expert in juvenile justice. You talking to me about felon disenfranchisement? All right, I'm your man. But juvenile justice, I'm not. But I can give you one bit of advice, right? That if you want to address juvenile justice policies, then the first thing I would ask you to do is to ask yourself, what would you do if it was your son that did something in school or whatever, or got in trouble? How would you want your son to be treated? And let that be the baseline, right? Let that be the baseline for policy decisions, right? And I think that when you have a family member that's been impacted, or a close friend that's been impacted, your view of justice, your view of the criminal system, your view of from even the public defender standpoint is slightly different, right? And you realize that you're not just dealing with a case or a number. You're dealing with a real person who have family, who have friends that love them.
Because when I think of a prison sentence, I think of not only how that sentence impacts the individual that we're sentencing, but also how it impacts their families. Because as a family member of an incarcerated person, I understand what it's like to walk into a prison and to be treated like an inmate. But the problem is, if only we began as a society to treat inmates like people,
Yeah.
then we wouldn't have to talk about what it feels like to walk into a prison and have a family member be treated like an inmate.
Yes.
But because we dehumanize as a society
And that's it right there. It's the dehumanization process.
those who we believe are not worthy of humanization,
Yes.
is why we have this perpetual, we'll just lock these people away and then they'll no longer be a problem for society, when the statistics show that that's not true.
And the determining factor is that they were convicted of a crime.
Yeah.
Right. But now here's the thing, right? So here's the philosophical question that I want to ask you, right? Madam Law Professor and State Attorney. Who is worse of an individual, right? Neil, that committed a crime and didn't get caught, or Desmond, that committed the same crime and got caught? Who's worse?
You know, it's funny because maybe you should go be a professor too. That's always
Keep preaching that to him.
Yeah.
Wouldn't he be great with students?
That's also a question that I would ask of my students in the beginning of my semester. How many of you have done something in your life that had you been caught, you could have been arrested?
90% raise their hand. I know 90 or better.
And then I tell them the only difference between you and the individuals that we serve in this system is that they got caught.
Yep.
Because the reality of it is most of the people in this society have done something, some one thing at some point in their lives that if they were caught, they could have been arrested and prosecuted.
Yep.
But they were not caught. And if we begin to humble ourselves in that way, then we can begin to understand why it is wrong as a society for us to dehumanize those whose only difference between them and us is that they got caught.
Or they turned themselves in. Or they even turned themselves in, which to me, that person that turned themselves in is, to me,
Have a
is a
level
little
of
bit
it-
better.
yeah, 'cause they have a
than
level of
that person.
integrity.
Yeah, there you go.
Right.
That turn, and so, but here's the thing. I want to make sure.
You keep pointing at me, man.
Yeah.
Just letting you know, I'm getting a little triggered
You
by the
need to get a little
whole thing.
Yeah,
And he
right.
said you as the
a couple
right,
times.
who's the worst person, right?
And then he wanted you to co-sign on it.
And you see how I diverted that, right?
Listen,
Yeah.
Politics
come on, he's
101,
a
I've
big
learned
Ohio
that.
State fan. We get
appreciate
listen.
it.
He's a Buckeye fan, right?
Don't
Anytime
try
we get
that.
a chance to disparage him, we have to disparage him on this show. I mean, that's par for the course.
I'm
right?
not co-signing that. That's right.
Right. But
my
here's
guy.
the thing. So I want to just sift just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. I still want to talk about misperceptions, right? So there, like I said, the public enemy number one in a lot of communities is the state prosecutor, right? Y'all locking everybody up. Y'all doing this. Y'all ain't going after the police and this and that, right? And you know what I've seen in some occasions is that the public have expectations of a prosecutor that's not necessarily realistic, right? And they give a prosecutor far more like ability and authority, right, than the prosecutor actually have. The two things I want you to speak to is those misperceptions, right, and the limitations of your office, right, as it relates. Matter of fact, and if you want to tackle this, let's tackle this. Police-involved shootings, right? What are those things that may be in the way of successful prosecution or whatever in that? And then are there other limitations? Because your predecessor took a stance, and, you know, what we've seen, the reaction was that the governor really came down on her and was really like, it was kind of crazy, right? They really went after her, right? Is the governor the only state official that can have impact on the state attorney's office and limit, you know, the way how they actually prosecute? Those two things I'd like for you to talk about. And Neil, you could break it up if you want to.
So thank you for that, because I think this is really important. And one of the things that we kicked off 2022 with is community education, because I think that people don't really understand what the role of the prosecutor is and what the reach and limitations on the office of the prosecutor are. So the legislature, not the prosecutor, makes the laws. The prosecutor is the one who enforces the laws that have been placed by the legislature. So we often have calls with regards to officer-involved incidents where they want me to prosecute. They want me to file charges. And people are disenchanted, they're disappointed, they're upset that in any given particular case, I don't file charges. And my response to them is, the law has not given me a mechanism in which I can file charges. So you're asking me to do something that is beyond my capacity. I understand why you want me to. I saw the same video that you saw. I am outraged in the same manner that you are. But here, specifically in the state of Florida, we have a legislature that is very, very pro law enforcement use of force ability, meaning that we have stand your ground law here. Stand your ground law also applies to law enforcement officers. So if an officer says that he is in fear for his safety, whether or not that fear is reasonable, they can use force, including deadly force. So if an officer is in pursuit of someone and that person is running away, and the officer shoots that person and he ends up shooting them in the back, and the officer then says, well, I saw them turn around and I was in fear that they had a gun, and I shot based on my training and experience because I had to preserve my life. That is considered, legally speaking, a justifiable use of force under the laws of this state.
No matter what anyone else thinks or
No matter what
feels
anyone
or
else
anything
thinks
like
or
that.
feels.
In that
That
moment,
is-
the law is guiding
The
them.
law is guiding them, and that is considered a justifiable use of force in this state. And as state attorney, I do not have the authority to bring criminal charges in that case. And people will say, well, just file the charges and see what happens. And you brought up my predecessor earlier. What happens when we do things that we don't have the legal authority to do is that we can have either cases removed from us, as happened with her, or we can be removed from office.
So that just opened up a can of worms, right? Because then, right. So the first one is right with the laws that allow the police officer to shoot a suspect that's running away. I know that there's a dot matrix chart of aggression, right? That is taught at every police academy in the state of Florida, and it basically says what a police officer can do, right, depending on the response of the person that they're interacting with, right? And so he just can't come out and just start shooting somebody. There's a progression there. Sometimes it accelerates at light speed. Does the law that the Florida legislature passed expand on the dot matrix to allow a lot of wiggle room for law enforcement to actually shoot a person? That's one question. And then the other one is that, all right, so I know, right, based on my limited knowledge in law school, is that if a prosecutor is trying to bring charges against someone when there's no legal basis to bring those charges, that could fall into the category of a malicious prosecution, right? And they could be removed. Sued. But here's the question, right? But how come that is true in that case, right? Especially when it deals with officers. But then you have prosecutors where we've shown that they were engaged in gross misconduct, right? And falsely charging and pushing for the conviction of people who were incarcerated for numerous years. And we see where prosecution was hiding evidence and everything, but that they can't be sued and they're not removed from office. Isn't that like...
inconsistent.
Yes.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that is going to
So
go
who could change that?
the legislature
And how we get that happen?
by putting people in office who sees that problem and champions a cause and changes the laws.
So let me ask you something.
Okay.
Let me ask you something.
'Cause I got-
Hold on. Let me
Well-
go because time is running out here. Des.
Oh, we got nothing but time here. Let's go.
Who's looking out?
Not so.
No, I know. So you mentioned something about the legislature and what people can do, and I have to say that I talk to people about why to get involved in civic engagement, elections, all that kind of stuff, and I bring your name up, right, as somebody who you can see a before and after, right? You can see the impact that elections have, and I want to laud you for that. Like the tangible impact in the jail and the juvenile system, and the things that you are doing, are impacting real people's lives in our community. But I'd like to ask a question for the non-lawyers who are watching, because y'all are lawyers, and I'm realizing, I'm like, oh, we're getting technical here. I would wonder if you could tell us what things you've learned in your first many months in office. Like, what did you expect, and it kind of played out that way? What's been a surprise?
How broad the law is, particularly surrounding officer-involved incidents, right? So there was a case that we all saw nationally. We saw a video of a child who was in a fight at school, and the law enforcement officer went to break up the fight, and he slammed the girl on her head. It was on national news. We all saw the video.
Yeah.
It was horrific. There was an expectation from the community that I would file charges. I was not able to file charges because the use of force technique that the officer used was in that matrix that you just described. It was a trained technique from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement that was permissible in order to bring someone into custody who was then resisting the lawful commands of a law enforcement officer.
So you got these misplaced expectations all of a sudden.
Oh, but they were even mine because
But no one knows
because
that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
because
Don't know
what the community needs to understand is that before you're ever disappointed with my decision, I first am disappointed by the decision that I have to make. And I had to come out and I had to say, I cannot file charges in this case. But we need to look at that broadly. One, I cannot file charges because the law does not permit me to. But two, we cannot file charges against people for things that are not illegal. Because just as you don't want charges brought against you for something that isn't illegal, I cannot now say, I am the state attorney.
But
I am the top
because
cop.
we don't like that police officer shoot, or we don't like how it happened.
I get to define the law,
It
right?
first has to be illegal in order for me to enforce it. And even if I don't like the fact that it's not illegal, that doesn't mean that I can say, well, I don't like it, so I'm going to file charges. I don't
we have to change the law.
We have to change the law. I don't have the authority to
Okay.
do that. And it's so important. Civic engagement in this area is so important. So what did I do? I proposed a bill that would change it, because our children should not be subject to the same use of force while they are in school that someone who is a grown-up is subject to on the street. But that's not in the law currently. Okay. So I said, okay, I don't like this. I'm going to propose a bill to change it. Not one legislator picked up the proposal.
Even
Not
though we're
one.
making all these changes in schools right now.
Not
all
one.
this stuff is going on.
For the kids. We got to
Not-
protect the kids, right?
we got to ban
We gotta protect the
53
kids.
books for the kids. Yeah.
Not one legislator picked up that proposal. For every issue that I have come across where I have seen injustice, I have proposed legislation that I believe would fix it. And the legislators, those are not priorities for them.
Well-
so then I say to your public, make who you put in office a priority for you.
Yeah.
So that in response to that, you get a bill like that does get a response in the legislature.
Well, I got a situation to have an easy fix that we don't have to go to our legislators to fix. Easy one. And I know we're running out of time. I see you and Neil watching the clock, but this is a good one. It's a zinger too, right? And it's not necessarily asking you a question, but I'm just making say recommendation, right? So when there's a crime committed in the community, and I see it all over the place, right? I mean, I really do see it. Someone is injured. Police come out there, and they even have a press conference, whatever, saying someone in the community seen something. We need the community to cooperate. When we don't have the cooperation of the community, it makes it harder for us to solve the crime and to bring justice, right? And police officers, state attorneys, they're like drumming that in, right? And then you got the other part of the community talking about, well, don't snitch. Well, I got a little thing with that, right? Because snitching is different from telling, right? We need people to do more telling, right? But here's the thing, that the police officers would get mad at the community when the community say don't snitch. Right? Say, no, you can't be doing that. You can't be doing that, right? Because we need to have justice, right? We need to solve this crime. But then they'll turn around and have this blue wall of silence, right? Where they know an officer did something wrong, and they got a culture that if an officer actually speaks up about that, the officer that's doing the right thing is ostracized, right? It don't take any legislation to fix that, right?
No.
If police officers, if law enforcement would do exactly what they're imploring the public to do within their ranks, right, that would help solve a lot of issues around police brutality and some of the questionable shootings and other unjustified traffic stops and all kinds of stuff, right? How do we start that dialogue? Because we don't have to elect anybody to change that we can engage. Why?
I disagree with you because police chiefs are appointed by your mayors and sheriffs are elected by the people. And those are the people who control the culture of the agencies that uphold that blue wall of silence that you're talking about.
How much control do they have? Because I've seen cases where police chiefs have actually tried to shift the culture and they weren't there too long.
Right, but that's because of the police unions.
Okay.
That's because of your police unions. So
but we can't elect them, can we?
No, but we can elect people who limit the power and the reach of the police unions.
Okay, well,
so if we pull the layers back, the police union is a real issue as it relates to kind of some of the structural challenges that we see.
It is.
And you got competing forces there because, when you talk about unions were formed to protect the workers, right? And so you have a police union that's supposed to protect the workers. But what I think unions don't do is that when unions have an employee that's really doing some illegal stuff, whatever, unions are not saying that we're going to spend our resources and get you lawyers to defend the illegal stuff that you're doing at your job. I don't think regular unions do that.
And that's the problem with the police unions is that police unions are notorious for defending the bad behavior of their law enforcement officers. And the bad behavior of law enforcement officers often is the infliction of violence on communities. We have a Brady list, and we have officers who are on our Brady list who were fired by their chiefs or their sheriff, who had to get their job back because of their union, fired for legitimate reasons that makes them not trustworthy to be a witness in court. But because of the police unions, they regained their jobs.
Wow.
So the police unions
now they're on the inside, they're on the streets, they're interacting.
And then they're making the good police officers, because I know that there are way more good law enforcement officers than they are bad. But then when you have a culture that hides them, and I'm telling you, it's identical. If you have a community that hide the people or shield the people that are doing bad things in the community, right? And you make the situation worse and nobody benefits. And I think that's the same way with law enforcement. That's the same way even with state attorney's offices, because there have been state attorney's offices that have had bad prosecutors that have been doing all kinds of nefarious things, withholding evidence, stacking charges unnecessarily, right? And doing all kinds of but they're allowed to thrive in that culture, and anyone that speaks out is not all of a sudden soft on crime or a bad person, whatever.
And I'll tell you something else about that as we get ready to close.
I like that.
It's important that we understand that this system that we've described here tonight, it wasn't created overnight. So we're not going to be able to fix it overnight.
Okay. Cool. I could rock with that.
It's an unrealistic expectation that within my 15 months in office that I could right all of the wrongs that have been created over decades. But many people expect that I should.
Man, listen, with a resume like you had, I mean, Neil just took a whole minute reading all, and then you are from the University of Florida, right? I mean, y'all could do superhuman things coming from, maybe it's FIU. That's what it is. It's FIU. If you came from FIU, the expectations would have been legitimate. I understand that, but listen.
But those expectations are challenging. But we want to encourage you.
Yes,
for real, like definitely. Watching you take the day to day, the week to week, and then, like you said, these giant issues that can come at you. We know that change doesn't happen, overnight like that. But like when you got the list, so we know what things are happening because you're doing your thing, and we're grateful for that.
We are appreciative of you coming out. And the only requirement now, not we closing out, is that you get to bob your head to our theme song one more time.
All right.
Here we go.
Thanks for having me.
You know that we are the voices.